Therapists, if you're looking to grow your private pay caseload, you'll want to check out Thrizer. Thrizer makes therapy more affordable for your clients up front, saving them on average 70% per session, all while you earn your full private pay rate. Check out join.thrizer.com/modern therapist to learn why thousands of therapists and clients are using Thrizer.
Since 2007, Buying Time has supported entrepreneurs and therapists on their admin, marketing, and bookkeeping needs, and so much more. Check out their free Buying Time Systems Inventory Checklist to uncover hidden expenses and optimize spending in your practice. Find that at buyingtimellc.com/MTSG.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt Widhelm and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt Widhelm with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things that go on in our practices, the things that go on in our lives, the things that we do to manage our practices. And while this is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, this is an episode where we're going to talk about planning for our own deaths, our own end of life, our own potential incapacitations, what we do with our practices, how we manage our clients, especially if those things are untimely. And along with this is an episode where we might talk about some things that might be difficult content. So listen to this episode with the right kind of care for yourself. And helping us in this conversation is Dr. Robyn Miller, has a wonderful Theraclosure program, and here to talk to us about how to plan for the stuff that we don't actually really want to talk about. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Curt. I know this is something most of us want to avoid, but my hope is in talking more about this, it can provide us with peace of mind rather than anxiety or fear about the future. We can kind of know, done it. We've done the right thing. We have a plan in place, and then we can relax.
This is a conversation I've wanted to have for quite some time. I had a close colleague who died. I also had another colleague who actually was on the podcast, a friend and colleague who had been faced with pancreatic cancer. We'll link to Patty's episode in the show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. But before we get started, I wanted to ask you the question that we ask all of our guests, which is, who are you and what are you putting out into the world?
So I'm a psychologist. I have been in private practice in Bethesda, Maryland for almost 25 years. And that's what I love to do, be in that really intimate and intense relationship with people that is so special and so powerful and meaningful. But in the course of doing what I love to do, I unfortunately had to step in for two close colleagues who were facing tragedies. And in the role of practice executor, really had to trial by fire learn what patients needed and how to provide that, and as well as kind of the bigger picture. And so that has become a mission of mine, though we don't want to think about it, really spreading the word to therapists about how important it is that we do consider our own mortality. If we value the relationship with our patients and we think it has the power to be therapeutic, we have to also appreciate that it has the power to be harmful if it's interrupted in a traumatic way. So that's where I'm coming from.
I'm guessing most people who get into this kind of a role, their first experience with it is not by necessarily well planned out intention. This is something that I want to do, but kind of, I think, like a lot of what I see with colleagues that I know, which is, hey, just in case anything happens, please. And I'm guessing through a lot of that process, and since this is a podcast and people can't see things, Dr. Miller is nodding along very much with what I'm saying here. So I'm guessing that there are lots of things that you've learned along the way that are just mistakes that people make along this. And so in helping our audience not have to make those same mistakes or learn things the hard way, What do you find that people generally get wrong in this kind of a process?
Well, the biggest thing is just not addressing it at all. That is the biggest get it wrong, where it really leaves not only your patients to face a, blank door or a blank screen if you're doing video calls, wondering kind of what happened. Did you just give up on me? Are you, you don't care about me anymore? That kind of, feeling of rejection that someone has to process until they eventually may share the news. They just doing something is the first, good step. But that being said, when people, say, okay, I want to do the right thing, what is that? Our field has typically really left it up to each person to kind of figure out themselves what that means. And even if you've had some ethics training, it's typically pitched as an administrative matter that you need to be sure to fill out that paper at work and put it away for your practice. People don't understand the clinical role of it, the importance of thinking clinically and bringing a clinical perspective to the interaction with patients that you're going to be telling, a tragic, shocking news to, and then how to help them move forward. So exactly what you said, Curt, about this, I think this historically has been, as it was for me with my friend when we set this up, more than 20 years ago. I'll do it for you. You do it for me. Yeah, sure. And, we trusted each other and knew each other clinically. So already that was, something powerful and good. And I was able to use that moving forward. But there was so much we hadn't thought about and we hadn't put into place, and so many challenges that come up without that written, very clear, actionable plan that really needs to be much more comprehensive than people realize, so that you can access passwords, so you can get into the information that you need to make those calls. The list goes on and on.
So before we get into the logistics, I really liked what you were saying about the clinical elements of it, because it feels like for therapists, that's the first thing that we're going to think about if this responsibility falls to us. How do I interact with clients clinically? We don't need to go into it deeply. We've got other conversations about it, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on how we think about the clinical elements of our incapacity or death.
So I think we have a few responsibilities. One is to know our clients, the kind of practice we have. So someone who has a practice full of people with grief and loss or trauma, they are going to really need to plan very carefully for each patient, knowing that that's their vulnerability. They might plan in a different way than someone who sees people, for 3 sessions for an evaluation or a short-term kind of course of treatment. So knowing your style, knowing what you bring to the table, what you believe about and use the relationship as part of your treatment, the more the relationship is part of the treatment, the more comprehensively you need to think about the impact that your sudden absence will have on this person who is reliant on you, who you mean a lot to. And I think it's hard, as therapists, I think on one hand, we appreciate, that we forge these really powerful and meaningful bonds with people. But on the other, either out of being self-deprecating or, we kind of go, well, they'll be okay. They're high functioning. They're, people will be okay. And that may be true depending on your measure, but you are important. As a therapist, you are important to your patient, and it does require us to acknowledge that and then think about how to responsibly shepherd them from the care that you've trained for and devoted so much into providing them to an absolute sort of nothingness where they then don't know where to go, don't know how to get help, might fall through the cracks. Some are feeling burned. And I had one person tell me when I had to notify her very sadly about her therapist's loss, she said, I will never see another therapist again. I poured my heart out to this person for 12 years, and now I'm supposed to go see someone else. Clearly, coming from a place of trauma and a very painful reaction that person later sent me an email sort of apologizing and, saying they regret that reaction. But of course, it's understandable. It's an abandonment. So really what I am talking about is, though of course none of us can help it, we're not intentionally abandoning people. And of course, we can't promise to be everything for everyone all the time. We are creating relationships where people expect us to be there, and we hold their secrets and we hold their history and we hold a whole lot. And we want to prevent them from feeling rejected and from the loss of all the therapeutic benefits that we've worked so hard on in the treatment. Because if they feel like we didn't care enough to put a plan in place, we didn't care enough to leave referrals, we didn't care enough to make sure their records are secure and that they might be able to have access to them the next time, then it affects how they hold the therapist and the therapy moving forward. And it can be damaging to them. I have had people tell me, I loved my therapist so much, but I was so angry that I never got a call, that he hadn't had anything in place, that no one even told me that he died. And I found out 2 months later. I was so angry. How could he not have cared enough about me to have any thought in mind? And so, that part of the clinical piece is also like, what do you want to leave people with if a tragedy happens? You want them to, sure, feel sad and mourn, and it's difficult, but do they have to be traumatized at the same time? Does it have to be a traumatic loss, or can it just be a sad loss? They're different.
Therapists, if you're looking to attract private pay clients, Thrizer is the tool you need. Thrizer helps clients successfully navigate their out-of-network benefits to save on therapy upfront, and you still get your full private pay rate. Chances are you're already familiar with superbills, so how is Thrizer different? Superbills can be extremely overwhelming for clients to navigate, and Thrizer is transforming the process to be much simpler.
Here's how. First, clients can instantly verify their out-of-network coverage with Thrizer's free benefits calculator. Then, Thrizer takes care of submitting claims, no more super bills, and dealing with all of the insurance stress. But what truly sets them apart is Thrizer Pay, the option for clients to just pay a copay for sessions instead of waiting 6+ weeks for a reimbursement check. They even cover the rest of the therapist rate to make you whole up front and then wait for the reimbursement on the client's behalf.
This isn't too good to be true. Thousands of clients and clinicians are already using Thrizer to make the therapy process more seamless and accessible. Check them out at join.thrizer.com/modern therapist and use the code Modern Therapists to enjoy waived credit card fees for your first $2,500 in charges.
I'm thinking about the number of clients on therapist caseload that could potentially be there, as well as significant people that could have been treated in the past. And it sounds like there could be the potential to end up having to write a lot to whoever is the executor of a professional will about each and every one of these clients. That takes a lot of thoughtfulness to be able to convey that beyond just saying, hey, contact this person, let them know that I'm dead and I'm no longer a resource.
Yeah, there are so many things involved in being the practice executor, and especially if you are doing it for someone that you do have a close relationship with, as happened to me the first time, where my very closest therapist friend and peer supervision partner of 17 years got sick and died 7 weeks later. And in the tragedy of that and reeling emotionally with my own loss of her, then I did have to not only call 30 weekly patients and tell them as sensitively as possible while holding back my own feelings as much as I could about this loss, and then help them with referrals and try and provide some support. And many of them called me multiple times. They wanted to know updates before she died. They wanted to know whether they could attend a memorial service. They wanted to, have some way of communicating gratitude. So I was in touch with them a lot during this period leading up to her death and then afterwards. And then exactly what you're saying, past patients too often come back, and each jurisdiction has different laws about what our obligations are, not only about record retention, but notification when the custody of the record changes. So for example, I had to write all the past patients saying, I'm writing to inform you that the medical records from the practice of Dr. B have been transferred to my custody. And if you should need access to them in the future, feel free to reach out to me. And please let me know if you'd like more information. I wasn't going to put it in the letter to people who maybe hadn't seen her in 6 years, but had to get, that so that they knew where to find their medical records. So there's a lot of work to be done for current and past patients as well. And then finding the referrals, as you can imagine, I hear so many people just looking for a therapist who say, I called 10 people and no one has openings and I can't find anyone. The practice executor needs to step in and find good matches with availability for all those people all at once. I mean, it's a huge time-consuming job. The alternative, and what happens when people either don't have a will or haven't really specified what they want someone to do, the minimum that happens all the time is something happens to a therapist, their neighbor, at least if we're talking about physical office space, their neighbor puts a note on the door saying, patients, contact this other therapist for information. And then they may or may not call the other therapist. Some just won't. And I have an experience with a man who just never did. He thought, oh, she probably had an emergency. I'll come back next week. And this was someone that I had learned in a different situation that his therapist had died. And I called and reached out to him. And he had said, oh, I saw a note on the door and I just didn't call, and was devastated to kind of hear this. But in any effect, the minimum is they might get a notice by a note on the door, and then they might get from a colleague, here's a list of 3 people in the community I suggest. 3 people who are probably not the right fit or suited for the right, diagnosis or issue, and may not have any openings at all. But you've done your duty if you've said, here's a couple names. So to do it right, is, I think, really thinking about each person and what they need. And as much as you can ahead of time in writing your will, have a good list of referrals, lots of people who you respect in the community that you would want your executor to be able to reach out to and say, hey, do you have the capacity to take one of these patients from this practice? And to go through a list and try and find the matches. And alternatively, as the practice executor, we have to tap into our own networks and find our own referrals to try to match people with. But I think that is a very caring thing to do. And one of the things that people who just think about a professional will as an administrative matter don't really think about. And so it's very, very time consuming and really intensive, and is kind of the whole first phase of stepping in as a practice executor is to take care of current patients. That's the very first priority that needs to happen. Then there are other steps that happen as well. But the first thing is, getting all that current patients need in place for them.
As you're talking, it seems like there is a lot of work to do this really well. And there's a lot of thought that can go into it, and best practices have potentially a dynamic professional will that has some sort of information about current clients or different as things change, the will gets updated, all those kinds of things. And so I think we can talk about that again in a minute. But I'm curious about kind of the bare bones. What are the ethical obligations? What are the things that if we can't get all the way to best practices, what do we need to make sure that we're doing right away, that we're doing at a minimum when we're planning for the unexpected?
So when we're planning, we need to create a professional will. That's a document that is really for your personal representative because your practice goes to your estate. They are the ones who actually own your practice now. But they are probably not the people you want to have to deal with it and to interface with your patients because they're not prepared and they're grieving, and it's a huge burden to leave to family. So a professional will kind of says, hey, personal representative, I want this colleague who has agreed to be notified as soon as something happens to me, and they're going to step in and take care of my practice. They are going to notify all my patients. They're going to try to provide them with referrals, and they are going to ensure the confidentiality of all the medical records. Those are the minimum. That's the most important pieces of your ethical obligation to your current patients and to the confidentiality of their records.
So I'm sure at this point, many listeners are saying, what are the nuts and bolts that also go into this? Because there's, okay, my surviving partner now needs to say, hey, therapist friend, go execute this. And what should we leave behind for our therapist friend to be able to actually be able to do this with all of the intention that you're suggesting that we do here?
So I encourage people to really think about your highest functioning patient and your lowest functioning patient. Hold them in your mind. Like, don't think about this abstractly. Think about your practice and your own patients and what will happen to each of these two people if you do not show up tomorrow. If you don't answer their calls, if you don't reply to their emails, what are they going to feel? What are they going to need? What are they going to do? Some patients may become suicidal. Some patients may get very withdrawn. Some patients might get very angry. They're waiting. And I have recently interviewed a whole number of therapists who have lost their own therapists in traumatic situations. So they are really on the inside. And they are telling me, with such despair, even remembering it sometimes 25 years later, tears in their eyes about the pain that period of time where they didn't know what happened to their therapist and where were they, and that anxiety and often feeling rejected that comes, that how terrible that really has been. So thinking about how are your patients going to react? What do they need? How do you want them to be informed? Who is going to do that? The who is huge. It takes a huge amount of time, and a lot of it is very urgent. For example, you want to get to patients as quickly as possible if you can, so that they aren't banging on the door or waiting for someone to show up. But I reached out to people whose appointments were coming up tomorrow, the day after, first saying if I couldn't reach them, leaving a message saying I'm covering for Dr. B, and unfortunately, we need to cancel her appointment that's scheduled for tomorrow. Please call me. That would be the first message that I would leave and the only information that would be left. But then when you're speaking to people, then it's, okay, what do you want them to be told? How much medical information would you want shared with your patients? Some people want nothing, only say it was a medical issue. Other people, like my friend, say that it is terminal pancreatic cancer. I want them to know there is no hope. I don't want them to fantasize that I'm going to be okay. I want them to know what it is. And so people have their personal preferences. You want to communicate that. And it may have a lot to do with your style in how you interact with your patients anyway in the therapy. So you want to have that said. You want to put down, would you be comfortable having patients come to your memorial service? Because patients will ask, what happened? Can I come? Is there a service? So you want your representative to know your wishes. You want them to know, where are your records? How do they access them? If they're electronic, what are your passwords? How do they get the 2-factor authentication that so many of us have now? How are you going to update your passwords? Even if you make a list of them somewhere, are you going to remember every time you're prompted to update your password to go back to that list and update it? You don't want to make a plan and then somebody can't get to your schedule or your patient contact list. So really thinking through the fine details about how's it going to work. People who keep paper calendars, how is the executor going to get your schedule? Thinking it through in great detail. If you have a group practice, what's going to happen to not only your patients, but your employees? Who's going to pay the rent, keep the lights on, and do payroll until your estate can figure out whether to sell your practice or whether the employees are going to buy it or step in? So you want to appoint an administrator who, on your death, agrees to step in and do the basics so that your entire practice isn't, completely unable to run the very next day. All the details, take it all the way through about what happens if you're not there.
When you hire Buying Time, you get an entire team of accountable, knowledgeable virtual assistants with different specialties. It's a pretty amazing one-stop shop for your business needs. And I should know, I've been a happy customer of Buying Time since 2015. Buying Time has helped me and other therapists with admin and client customer service, finances and bookkeeping, including sending out invoices and super bills, setting up automated systems to take care of clients during onboarding, marketing, including websites, social media, blogs, and newsletters, and a whole lot more.
Buying Time believes in streamlining, efficiency, and being cost-effective. So they help you to regularly evaluate systems to make sure you're not paying for programs and platforms you don't need. And they've put together a free systems inventory checklist to help all of us to uncover hidden expenses and optimize spending in your practice. Go to buyingtimellc.com/MTSG to get your free checklist now.
How much of this gets written into a professional will, and how much is, whether it's like a group practice, standard operating procedures, or in a personal will, or like, where does all this information go? Because it seems like if something happens suddenly, there's very basic information that needs to be shared immediately. If it's something that's a diagnosis, even if it's a short period of time, like weeks, there's still an opportunity potentially to have some conversations and talk through the caseload and talk to your executor about what you can do. And so to me, it's, where can this information be housed? Because it sounds like we're talking about a pretty long document, potentially with client information, which I don't think was what you're saying. So where does all of it go?
So a professional will is not your last will and testament. It's actually not even a legal contract unless both people sign it, your executor. So a lot of people say, I'm going to appoint my professional neighbor to be my executor. Well, if they don't sign that, they actually have no responsibility. And a lot of this operates on good faith. And most of us in good faith want to step up for our friends and colleagues and to do our best, but without realizing how much is involved and how much work. So even if someone says, I'm going to do all this for you, they may be on vacation. They may have their own personal crisis. They may be overwhelmed with their own patient emergencies and not have the time to do all these best practices. And they might, have to do the minimum. And sometimes that's the best we can do. That's just life. But you can set down as best as you can what you want people to do. And that's what the professional will is for. So you document not patient details, not patient identifying information. You could put down patient initials or a birth date or a code number if you want your practice executor to know specific information about patients and how they should be handled, but don't put identifying information in there. But you do want to specify exactly what I've been through already, kind of all your preferences and referrals and who needs to be notified and how you want it handled and where the records are and where they can find the passwords and all of those things. And you want to give a copy to your personal representative, your partner, your best friend, whoever is going to be the first person to learn that something happened to you. They need to know that one of the first things they have to do in their grief is to contact the practice executor and say, you're on. Some tragedy has happened now. Here's the document. They should have it too. The practice executor should have their own copy. But once they're notified, then they're going to look at that and they're going to say, okay, what did I agree to? What am I going to do? How am I going to step in? And they're going to take over and do all of those things. And with EHRs, it's easier than it used to be because we can access calendars and contacts and client files without actually going into someone's office. So, you want to be sure that you set someone up to have the information they need to access that. And also, if you have paper, then you need to have a plan in place where someone can go and get your paper files and documents.
Beyond kind of the situations where there's been no plan in place, what kinds of things have you come across that have surprised you in this kind of work? Either things that were thought to be well-intentioned that didn't quite play out well, or things that were brilliantly thought out that you hadn't considered before?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the saddest situations I've come across a few times is people get notified by text message that their therapist has died by someone who thinks they already know. How awful can you imagine? I'm so sorry to hear. What a loss. Wait, what? Are you talking to me? I don't know what you're referring to. Oh, wait, you didn't know your therapist died. How tragic. So that I've heard that story a couple of times. When there's no plan, when someone doesn't ever hear from anyone ever again, and they find out on a listserv or an obituary or never what happened to their therapist. I have heard so many people never know what happened to their medical records, where they are. There are stories of therapists who, have kept boxes of records in their basement for 40 years. What happens if you're not there tomorrow? Who is going to get rid of those records safely and securely? And do they even know about the rules of confidentiality, or are they going to put them on the curb? Your state's then open to liability because your records are not handled according to law. So there are so many, really surprising things that have been unfortunate. And then I've also heard stories where people have had the opportunity to say goodbye, if possible. And of course, that's not always or often possible. But when there's a chance to say goodbye, even a phone call, a brief phone call, or a last short visit, an opportunity to see the therapist, to say what they've meant to them, that means a lot. And I have heard people say, my therapist handled it beautifully. It was a tragic situation and it was really painful and hard for me, but she handled it beautifully. What more could I have asked? People are not expecting your therapist to do everything in the world for you, but there is kind of a minimum of care given what we do and how vulnerable people are in our work that I think needs to happen. So there are some really lovely and thoughtful situations that I've learned about.
So you created a program called Theraclosure. What is it and how does it work?
Well, having had the experience a couple times and seeing how challenging it is, I started to give some talks. And the reactions I got from other therapists were like, oh my God, I never thought about this, or I don't know how to do that, or I don't know who to ask. And so I work to find solutions to all of these obstacles because I did a survey and almost 70% of therapists don't have a will, even though it's in our ethics across disciplines. No matter what your training, this is part of our obligation. So how come so many people don't do it? Well, it's hard. It's really hard and overwhelming and confusing. So I wanted to simplify all of that for people. So Theraclosure is a therapist professional executor service where people who would like to enroll, we meet with them for an hour. We really want to know you and your style and the kind of patients you see and how you relate to them. And then we go through all the details of your practice, many of the things I've talked about today about how to get access in very detailed, concrete ways to all your information, to your preferences, and so forth. We put all of that into a professional will that the therapist reviews, makes sure it's what you want it to be. And then you sign it and we sign it. And so now it's a contract where we are on retainer as your practice executor. We are named as the practice executor. You don't have to beg a friend. You don't have to promise a friend. You aren't going to be, worried about whether someone is too busy to actually do all the things that you really hope that they would do. We provide that service so people can be completely at ease knowing that if we were notified by your personal rep that something happened to you, we are immediately available and have the time and the resources and the capacity and are not, bogged down by personal devastating grief that really interferes with the ability of a good friend to do this, job. We can step in with expertise and professionalism and do all those things. We can go to the EHR and we have a solution for paper records as well, but we can log in. We have a password manager that we give you that tracks all the passwords. So you don't have to worry about making sure to update them all the time. Then we go into the EHR, we look at your calendar, we start calling people in order of their upcoming appointments so that we hopefully catch them before they are banging at the door. We talk to them in a clinically minded manner. We are not taking them on as patients ourselves, but we're using our clinical skills to assess how they're handling the news, what they need. We are, available to support them until we're able to connect them with a good referral. We tap into the referrals you've left. If necessary, we use our own networks to find referrals for people. Once the current patients are taken care of in that way, we move to notifying all the past patients, taking custody of the records, and then we go a step further and we also handle all the administrative aspects of the practice. So if you are owed money for services rendered, who's going to send out those bills? Or is your estate going to forfeit what you're owed? We will do that. And we will close down all of your auto pays that are, related to your practice. And we will change over your voicemail and your internet, letting anybody know that if they're looking for your practice, they should come to us. We will notify licensing boards, malpractice insurance. We will do everything we can to help your personal representative with the practice and business related things so that they can grieve and your practice is in the hands of people who know what needs to be done to close it appropriately.
Where can people find out more about you? I know we usually do this at the end of the episode, and I've talked about professional wills and stuff before. And in retrospect, I spoke about 2% of the considerations that people should have in their professional wills. And I am so glad to be a part of this conversation, and will be immediately coming back to my group practice and saying, hey, we have a whole bunch of stuff that we have to change going on here. So any people, including maybe people who are on this podcast, where can we find out more about Theraclosure?
So we have lots of information on our website, which is Theraclosure, THERA, closure, CLOSURE.com. You can read all about us. You can see exactly what we do and how we work and what we are promising. We have a yearly fee to keep us on retainer. The first year, there's a small additional fee for the 1-hour consultation and the creation of the professional will that is on file and that names us as the practice executor. And then each year there's a fee to retain us, and you have access to the client portal. You can update your information anytime you want. As your caseload changes, there may be specifics that you want to update. We remind you a couple times a year to do that. You don't have to worry about finding a template on the internet and whether it's actually legal or whether it's going to suit your practice. You don't have to pay $1,500 to an attorney to write the will for you, but do nothing else. You still then would have to find someone to do all of the work for you, and we do all that. So it's a fixed cost up front where you know exactly what your obligation is, and there's not going to be any surprise to your estate, because if you do it in an informal arrangement, sometimes the colleague will bill the estate hourly for the work as a professional executor. And lots of people make this agreement in writing even because people think, oh, it'll take 2 or 3 hours, so of course my estate will compensate you for your time, not realizing that it's going to take 20 or 40 hours to actually do all the things that I've described. And then your estate is going to get a $10,000 or $15,000 bill that they owe your colleague who just spent 40 hours working on your behalf. So in order to avoid that, you can kind of control a small cost up front to know that everything would be taken care of in the event of an accident.
And we will include a link to Theraclosure in our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. Follow us on our social media, join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue on or start this conversation if you haven't started thinking about this already. And until next time, I'm Curt with Katie Vernoy and Dr. Robyn Miller.
Thank you so much. Can I add one more thing before we go? I am happy to provide for listeners either a template of a professional will or a free consultation to, see if Theraclosure is right for you and to give you any tips if you want to handle it on your own. So feel free to reach out to me and let me know you heard about us from this podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Remember to check out Thrizer if you're a private pay therapist. Clients just pay a copay for your sessions while you earn your full private pay rate. They are transforming the out-of-network benefits process. No more super bills, no more reimbursement calls, and the best part, no more reimbursement waits. Check them out at join.thrizer.com/modern therapist.
Buying Time is a full-service virtual support agency that is standing by to support you in your practice. It's time for you to get out of the day-to-day and bring in someone you can trust who has the experience to help you with all of your business needs. And don't forget to go to buyingtimellc.com/MTSG for your free systems inventory checklist to get on the path to less expenses and more profit.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.